Okay. Welcome everyone to episode of Talks of Game Studies India. Today we present to you Brata Roy, who's currently doing his masters in English literature from FLU in Hyderabad. He has told that his interests lie around the modalities of detectives, which he also tries to create the penarchist. Uh, he is also associated with Sig Fetter with Dharti as a transcriber with the Canterbury Tales project and as a database contributor with Electronic Literature Knowledge Base. As with in the field of disability and inclusion, disability studies by assisting in research. He's also passionate about teaching and inclusion and would aid by teaching slum kids. So today he's going to present his paper on Hitman 2 and its Spectre of Mumbai, a lost city in. Over to you, Shommo.
Yeah, Aritro, thank you so much. At the outset, I would like to thank Game Studies India and Aritro especially for giving such a nice introduction and the opportunity to me to share the thing which was really passionate. Before I start, so I will be starting my screen share now, if that's fine. Yeah, is my screen visible?
Yeah, it is.
Right. Hello, everyone. Samya Roy here. So today I will be talking about Hitman 2 and its depth and its Spectre of Mumbai, city lost in translation. Now the thing is, before I start, I would like to point something out that this is the second time actually I am speaking about this topic. I had originally given this talk at Jamia Millia Islamia in a webinar hosted by Jamia Millia Islamia and Michigan. So this is even more special for me that I got to revise and present. It's great to be able to talk about it again. So as you can see that the paper is Hitman 2 and its Spectre of Mumbai, a city translation. I will elaborate about the topic and I will talk about it in details as we move on. So, all right, let's go. Okay, so first things first, I'll be starting by talking about the good old Yellow Orient. Please excuse my inability to let go of bad puns, bad marriage, where I can't really escape. So as you can see that I'm talking about various cultural artifacts like texts and films and things, where in some shape or form there has been discourse about the quote-unquote other, and more often than that, the description has been highly problematic. In my abstract, I mentioned about the yellowness in Breaking Bad's depiction of Mexico. While there can be a different side to that story, in the case of Monkey's Paw, it's a very famous short story, and ICC people might have fond memories of reading. And the very recent Extraction starring Chris Hemsworth, which also kind of played into the whole same dynamics of painting everything yellow and so on and so forth. The same thing can be seen here in Hitman 2. I'm talking one specific Mumbai which is set, one specific mission which is set in Mumbai, and that is why my attention actually is there the most. Now, why am I focusing on this aspect the most? Because as I told, in the cultural artifact, no matter what of a culture is depicted, or my interest here is in the depiction of a particular space. In that space, while in a depiction, I have seen that irrespective of which mode the depiction takes place in, there will be some aspect of stereotyping, and which stems from a very essentialist gaze. Now, when this happens, I have chosen the image of book-picked novels and other forms of written texts. But in this case, dealing with a game in particular, when you are an inhabitant of that particular, not exactly that particular space, but kind of have an idea about it, and then you play in that space For me, that experience was like reading a very poorly translated novel. Catch is, how do I know if it's a poor translation? Because I have read the original. And in this case, I have lived in the quote unquote original space and now I'm playing adaptation. So it reads like a very poor translation. It might be essential, it might be a simplistic way of putting it, but I hope that it aids understanding. And here, what I would like to talk about is a flickering infinity. I would like to mention two scholars and what they think about certain issues, and I will derive my argument from there. The first is Ian Bogost in his 2007 seminal work Persuasive Games, that procedural media like video games get to the heart of things by mounting arguments about the processes inherent in them. When we create video games, we are making claims about these processes, which ones we celebrate, which ones we ignore, which ones we want to question. I elaborate on this in latter slides when I look deeply into the mission structure with screenshots and whatnot. It is basically to say that every element of the gamic space, every dialogue spoken by the NPCs or the non-playable characters, every element has been encoded and encoded with a specific intention in mind. And therefore, this aspect which Bogos talked, when I am the player am playing inside that space, inhabiting that space, I can choose to think maker and understand that everything is there for a purpose. Next, N. Catherine Hales in once again every seminal, so I'm not bothered to repeat that word again. How we became post-human virtual bodies in cybernetics, literature, and informatics. She talks about something called the flickering signifier. She develops this idea from the Lacanian notion of the floating signifier. And in informatics, the signifier can no longer be understood as a single marker. For example, an ink mark on a page is a flexible chain of markers bound together by the arbitrary relations specified by the relevant codes. Now, what Locke talks about when he talks about floating signifiers is that he says that it is not only that the signifiers have an arbitrary relation with signifieds, but that the entire notion of the signifieds is kind of dubious. He obviously develops his argument from Saussure. Catherine Hales takes this argument a step further and says that even if both of them are arbitrary, it is never ever constant in unit time as well, because it is constantly changing, as she says. Rather, it exists in a flexible chain of markers bound together by arbitrary rules specified by relevant codes. Now, what do I understand here in relation to my experience of gaming is that I can finish a mission two, three, four, five, six, seven, whatever ways I can, depending on how much flexibility the game gives me. Now, every time I come back to this and I do a particular action, that action might signify something different. I might kill a man by poisoning his drink or throw a brick at him from another building. Now, these actions change how meaning making takes place. And therefore, if meaning making can take place in myriad different ways, then theoretically we can derive the argument, which is the third, is an infinity of actions then possible? No, because going back to Bogost, no matter how much quote unquote flexibility we seem it offers, at the end of the day, all the possibilities and probabilities converge at a point and at a certain site of play. And that literal site becomes a site of play more for the maker than for the player. What do you mean by this? When the maker is in the process of creating the game, the ideology is encoded and that takes dominance what is being played. Then my next question is, as players, how do we engage if the narrative is dominant, then do we have a say at all? Now, going back to the seminal essay by Stuart Hall on encoding and decoding, no matter what is encoded in the text, we can always come up with our own decoding of the same. I will elaborate more on this when I talk about my methodology and how have I got in deciphering this mission. But yes, we can always read it, understand the ideology, and critique it with the intention we have in mind as players. Talking about my methodology, I have used Andre Brock's critical technocultural discourse analysis, refers to as CTDA. Brock uses this concept to study Black experience on Twitter. But what I am doing here is not especially that, but I believe that we can draw similarities here. What he does in that case is he twice. He applies his kind of form twice. First, to study the properties of the medium, study the actions that take place in the medium. This might appear a little vague, but I will try to contextualize it more in the context of my yeah. I have tried to divide it in two aspects, depiction and interaction. What is depiction and what is interaction in the context of this mission? I'll try to elaborate. Now, depiction for me, for my own personal individual understanding, is when you're playing a game, the ready-made objective is to finish the mission or to get on with the story or get ahead with the story. You follow the objectives, you want to finish the mission as quickly as possible, and you want to get done with the game, or you are so eager to know what takes place. You are driven by the plot, so as to speak. Now, what is then interaction? Interaction for me is when exploring the space. I am not saying that interaction cannot take place within depiction. They obviously overlap, but what I am saying is when your action as the player is not driven by the logic of the plot, then you can take your time and explore the space more, which I have done in certain cases, and I will come to it, and perhaps then my point can become a little bit more clear. Now, this is the first stance which I talked about, depiction and the encoding of play, gamic space as the mise en scène. In cinema, in classical film studies, the mise en scène becomes very important because in early cinema or before the classical system came into play, the mise en scène was and still is very important. The roots of it lies in early cinema because the entire screen which would be visible in front of the camera had to be painted, decorated with utmost of care, because that is the part which would be visible on screen. Now, when we are playing a game, we can't say that there is a static mise en scène. No, like in modern cinema, there is no static mise en scène because the camera can go around in whichever way possible, and there will be a very fluid mise en scène place. Same thing can be said for the game, and we can read the gaming space as a kind of a mise en scène. Here I have used scholars' works to derive my argument once again. Soraya Mare, Espen Orset, and Nezar Al-Sayad. I will go over them one by one. In her work on video games, the visual politics of race, gender, and space, says it would be a mistake to reduce modern day video games to military simulation, players of games to passive receptors of mass media. She's clearly deriving her argument from Stuart Hall, and she very, very clearly says that how much she owes to Hall in her book. The origins of games do not necessarily define the limits of their potential. However, they do a powerful role in the capacity to imagine what might be possible, how we understand the world and our relations in it. This is what I was talking about in relation to the Bogost and Catherine Hales. Now, Orseth, in his work on Allegories of Space, the question of speciality in computer games, talks about the defining element of games is speciality. Computer games are essentially concerned with spatial representation and negotiation, as in how the space is designed and how act inside the space. And therefore, a classification of computer games can be based on how they represent or perhaps implement space. Now, this solidifies our understanding and the importance of the space and how ideology is propagated through how a space is designed. Now, the next for me becomes the most important. Nazar al-Sayad in Cinematic Urbanism, A History of the Modern from Real to Real, talks about, imagine if there was no real New York or real Los Angeles, or no trace of them left, and the only thing we have are films that depict them as a backdrop for their cinematic story. What kind of history would we write? Now, in this context, imagine that there was no real Mumbai, and the only real description of Mumbai or any Indian or any uh, subcontinental space is these cultural artifacts, extraction, monkey's paw, or the mission by Hitman 2. So what kind of a history are we talking about? What kind of a geography are we talking about? What culture are we talking about? I have used these logos. I will come to the logos. The first logo I would like to talk about is this one, as Assassin's Creed's logo I have chosen here, because the Cathedral of Notre Dame was ravaged by fire, and they actually used Assassin's Creed's visual mapping, video technology, whatever they used to create the game. The actual people went back to the game footage and the mechanics to recreate that in real life. So a very curious this is now my interest here is in this particular thing, that imagine if there was no real Mumbai and went back to the representation, then what kind of history are we talking about here? But the next question, the logical next would be to say, then is there at all something which is totally authentic? I will touch upon that as well. Before going into the details about how Hitman represents India, it is very important to recognize this is not the first time that India is being represented in a game, and it has been done before. And as a result, I am borrowing from Shovik sir on playing the subaltern, video games and post-colonialism. Sorry, this is a paper, not the book, where he talks about, he charts a brief history on it. It says one of the earliest video games to feature an Indian character is Street Fighter 2. Here, Dhalsim is portrayed as kicking yogic pose and as wearing out a torn saffron shorts and necklace of skulls so as to emphasize his oriental Indian mystique. He can spew fireballs, levitate, and likes curry and meditation. To add to his image of the oriental, he is very protective of his son Datta and his wife, who rather strangely is named Sari, after the dress worn by Indian women. Another classic set of stereotypes is to be seen in the empire building games that we are. Beside the points already made in connection with the inaccuracies of the Empire Total War, there are far greater problems that emerge in the state created by Age of Empire 3, the Asian dynasties, for example. Here, there are gross mistakes in that sepoys, as Indian soldiers in colonial armies were called, as an ethnic community in themselves, and that Brahmin priests are shown as warriors riding elephants. When cities such as London and Los Angeles were depicted so in video games, the Temple City ambush level in Hitman Silent Assassin 2002 can only manage to show just moving from warehouse to warehouse, ultimately meeting an auto rickshaw driver. Even more bizarre is Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3, Persona non grata, that is set in Himachal Pradesh. The ubiquitous Indian auto rickshaw is to be seen, but strangely, in a shootout between Bandos and Russian terrorists, the Indian army, or any Indians for that matter, seem to have decided to stay away. So it is very curious how Indian depictions have happened in video games. But now, moving on from a brief sense of history to what do we have here in Hitman 2, basically. Now, interaction and the decoding of play, the first step. This is the mission brief where we have three objectives, that is to Strung, Vanya Shah, and Dawood Rangan. I would touch upon them briefly in the course of my presentation and point out how these things work and how what is the logical structure that's in place. The first is Vanya Shah. Vanya Shah to me is a very curious character because, as you can see, this is her hideout, or this is her stay, or whatever you want to call it. To me, this is funny. And this person holding a cloth, this is Agent 47. And Agent 47 or Hitman is infamous for blending in wherever he wants, however he wants, irrespective of any ethnic identities, which is curious, which is something I'll come to. This is very interesting to me because of certain aspects. This woman is sitting here and she has servants, obviously, and her guards are dressed as if they are like what we see in weddings. What we see in weddings, the miniature, the sort of people who kind of there for show. Now, these are her real guards. They carry weapons, but they are dressed in an absolutely ethnic manner, ready to attend a wedding. Now, there is a peacock, and it is absolutely drenched in white. For me, this is very curious because of the sheer way that they have presented. To me, this seems like a very cheap knockoff of Midsummer Night's Dream. It seems like a very inverse knockoff of Midsummer Night and the world in which Bottom gets lost, perhaps. So this to me is a great curiosity as to how and why did they choose to design it like this? Do they really think that people in Mumbai are like this? Now, had this been a Grand Theft Auto, I would have given them the benefit of the doubt of satire and let them go. Hitman is extremely self-serious. That is where my question lies. Is that, seriously, guys, is this how you want to show culture? Okay. The next thing is the Crows. Now, the Crows are a gang led by this elusive person called the Maelstrom. Now, they're named the Crows, it's fine. But if you can see right here, that these are literal crow skulls and dead crows hanging from here. Seriously. A gang can name them after crows. But do you think in order to chart their territory or mark their presence, they would actually hang crow skulls? For me, this is too much of a stress, too much of a signifier to take in, too much for me to update as a marker of Indian culture. And I think that it could have been much, much, much more subtle. Literal identity tourism. This is very, very because here Agent 47 or Hitman kills Maelstrom, which is the final target of the mission, by dressing up as a bar. Perform, possess, and play. And obviously, I'm using the term identity tourism from Lisa Nakamura's very important work on how personas work in the online space. It is not the online space here, but the functionality as a Western gamer able to fit into the shoes of a barber and just sweep in, sweep out, become a laundry washerman in Mumbai, become a barber in Mumbai, perform roles, and just leave without any repercussions. It seems like a very, very oriental fetish to me. And this is also something that Nakamura talks about while navigating that online space. I'm forgetting the name of it. All look same. Yes, all look same. Now I remember it. Now, that was my part of depiction, where I talked about various aspects which were directly plot. You have to kill Maelstrom, or you have to go to Vanya Shah's place. You cannot escape those signs. They are so blatant. Now, this, in the other hand, is much, I would say, is much, much more subtle, because this is just a cyber cafe in the space, and they decided that they will have a cyber cafe. Now, I will show you in the next slide, probably it's the next slide, that this cyber cafe is actually called Arakshan. Now, why are, because in India, many cyber cafes, or in other places also, many cyber cafes are actually used for booking something. And here, if you can see, it's probably the logo of an old Hitman game, which I'm discovering right now. So obviously, maybe the signifier flickered away. Who knows? So another point which I want to make here is that how many cyber cafes in India have wallpapers like this, wall paintings like this, dart boards, and actual gaming machines like this? I am never ever seen one. I have seen one when it was closed, when I was a kid, but then it closed and I could never go and play these game machines. Now this game is not even set in an older time. It is very distinctly contemporary, yet they choose to design the space in a certain way. And this comes out especially when you are interacting with the space and not when you are driven by the plot. This is the difference that I'm trying to make. That some things you have on deeper explorations. Okay, so this is actually the place which I was talking about, Arakshan, right here. Shop names, once again, are a great curiosity to me here. A bakery is directly written in Hindi as bakery in Hindi. Bhang, a shop which sells bhang, is literally called bhang shop. Like, wow. A garment store is just called kapda. This is very interesting to me because they have thought they might have, coffee shops or cafes or whatever, and they think that, yeah, why not just translate the Hindi name? This to me is extremely, and it shows the essentialist reduction of a space that I'm talking about. A few things that I want to talk about here. The name of Dawood Rangan. Dawood Rangan. What a hilarious name. Come on, guys. This is not the 90s anymore. And Dawood Rangan, interestingly, is a very shady filmmaker. And if you go and hang around on his terrace, people are actually talking about the film. These During Frights and Snake and the Mongoose. These are the names of the films which he is making. Now, I really, really hope that if this is satire, this is ingenious. If this is not, this is utterly stupid and borderline offensive. To think that people from will be still engaging in snakes and mongoose even in their creative production. Another thing is important, if you can notice, he is impersonating someone called Gregory Arthur. Sorry for that. Gregory Arthur, who happens to be a very famous Broadway actor. He is wearing this outfit. Now, people who are roaming around him, these NPCs, if you hear closely, they will say, strange dress he is wearing. I have never seen a dress like that. Come on. You have never seen people wear trousers? Seriously. Because Daud Rangan literally wears the same thing. And it is because that the white man is roaming the streets. Suddenly, the normal dress also becomes curious. Then the familiar becomes defamiliarized. Now that I have tried to elaborate on the depiction, and then I would briefly hint on two aspects before I reach my conclusion, is a quest for consciousness and the notion of the laboratory. I would like to talk about a triad. Now, this is interesting to me. Specifically, this was pointed out to me at of my last talk, and I thought that it would be a great addition, so I did. I will acknowledge them at the end. So in this, I kind of look as a triadic experience. Now this at the end is like the British imperial soldier. This is Agent 47, a very crude represented 47, but we move on. And this is the modern Indian gamer. Just try to not get into the graphics too much. Now, we all have, in some shape or form, have heard discourses about how is often soldiers reflect later in their lives how they have just been puppets on the hands of their administration or whatever, especially Graduates will remember about Orwell in his work on shooting an elephant, on where he realizes that he is just a puppet. He can't go anywhere and has to fulfill his duty. So, in the same way, Agent 47 also, at the start, we see him as a laboratory product, someone who is totally a product of the lab. He was experimented on, and he is not supposed to have a consciousness. He is not supposed to have feelings, quote unquote. His head literally has a barcode on it. But in the course of the narrative, we slowly see him getting more aware and question the happenings around him. As we, the British soldier, also grow and start to question what's happening. Now, as the Indian gamer playing the game, and also as we grow, as we mature as gamers, I have had this realization, is that you start to realize that, okay, fine, I have been playing games with missions in America or with missions in other places, fine. But now that I'm playing in the Indian space, how do I perform the killing here? Because I'm literally killing myself, I'm killing my space. So that meta triadic awareness of slowly gaining consciousness seemed very appealing to me. And I feel that there can be a very big possibility that this is something that most gamers will feel like while playing or navigating in their own space. Now that we talk a lot about adaptation, problems of adaptation, problems of showing a particular space, then we have to also question, is there at all an ethics of adaptation? Can there be any ethics of adaptation? Is it at all possible? Sorry. Is it at all possible? Um, I was talking to a friend of mine about this project, about the paper that I was reading, and he told me that why make such a big deal out of it? I was reading through Reddit also, and many people also are of this idea that why make such a big deal that they have showed the slums of Mumbai or something, something. It is needed because otherwise, how will people recognize that they're inhabiting the space? Well, yes, it's true, but it can also be a little bit more subtle. Uh, some tropes can also not be so much derogatory. So here I would refer to three kind of works. Number one is Wit Sisler's Digital Arabs and the Representation in Video Games. This is not a quote, this is I'm just extracted from my paper. Sisler draws on the same tropes. He argues how Arabs or Muslims are presented to signify a certain type of dress, skin color, and obviously terrorism. Same thing happens here in Hitman, where the Mumbaikars are doused in a frame of yellow and crow skulls and mysticism. Be it Vanya Shah, be it the crow skulls, or the light yellowness, or the name Dawood Rangan hinting at the seedy underbelly of Mumbai, and Frog and the Nightingale, or whatever. These signifiers play into the imagination of creating India, so to speak. Next, I would refer to Philip Henningstadson's cultural code video games and I'm sorry, I can't see the book. Yeah, video games in Latin America. I'm sorry if I've typed it wrong. Oh God. So that Brazilian game space is readily characterized by certain signifiers of the Brazili did. I hope that that's a word. I am not aware of it. That have utilized once and again by game designers. Soccer, an ethnically diverse population, the bossa nova music, a tropical landscape replete with vibrant. Basically, he's talking about. Later, he would also go on to elaborate about the favela. He, Penix Stadson is talking about in the context of Max Payne 3, which also takes place in Brazil, and the favela plays a very, very important role. And the same thing happens in Call of Duty also. There is a very, very important mission which takes place in a Brazilian favela. So whatever might be it the Middle East or the Russia or Brazil, it's the same tendency of selecting certain signifiers and with them in order to represent a culture. It's seen everywhere. Now, it is interesting to talk about Russia because in Call of Duty Modern Warfare, I'm forgetting which Modern Warfare is one or two or three. It's not definitely not three. There is a mission called No Russians. It is a very important. It's an optional mission which you can choose not to play, and the only thing that you do in the mission is to butcher an airport filled with Russian civilians. Now, it's interesting because the makers are aware that this might be insensitive, and they say that no, this is an optional mission. Okay, understandable. But what is ironical also is what kind of a discourse that they're propagating elsewhere, and that doesn't seem problematic to them. Only where violence comes into play seems problematic, and they say that it is optional or whatever. You choose to ignore it, so as to say. Now, the next one is what I focus on, Shovik sir and Dr. Hamad, to the special issue on post-colonial perspective in game studies, where they say that will game studies continue to be subsumed under the neoliberalization of academia in the only telos is profit, and which churns out workers for the factory that is mainstream game development, or will game studies reflect on and question the ways that are embedded within the historical to global power structure? Will game studies adapt and question the ways the post-colonial is reproduced in as well as in games? It is very important that we ask these questions, as they have pointed out, that it is important to question the representation. What is correct or what is incorrect is perhaps the point, but not entirely the point. The point is to question dialectic and move on and hope for a better adaptation or a better representation, so as to speak. But if there is no dialogue, if there is no discourse, if there is passive acceptance, then these signifiers will continue to be established as the norm. So, therefore, is the mission accomplished? I would definitely not say so. And I would say that the mission still remains very much active. Here, I would like to stop. I would like to say thank you very much for giving this opportunity to me and allowing me to share this paper. There are people I would like to thank. Just give me a little moment. Game Studies India, obviously, Shovik sir for giving me this opportunity to speak, and Poonamdi for being so pertinent and particular about everything and helping me throughout. And then I would like to thank Dr. Diboluti Roy, Prakash Konagupta, Thomas Apperley, Shayan Mukherjee, and the audience members here for their presence and help, especially the professors that mentioned their help and input at times, which has helped me reframe, formulate, and understand my argument even better. Thank you so much for listening. It means a lot to me. Thank you. I will be stopping my screen share now.
Thank you for this talk. Enlightening. So we move on to the questions. We have one question as of now. I have a question related to language. This is from Xenia, who says that I have a question related to language use in the game. How is othering done via linguistic means? For example, do we see Mumbai residents with accents or Hindi or speaking accents of Hindi or speak language than English or anything similar?
Oh, yes. Thank you so much, Xenia, for that question. I hope I'm pronouncing your name properly. So, when I was talking about the shops and the outfit worn by Agent 47, I was talking about how people react to it, right? So when they react to it, I try to imitate their accent, and they do not speak in English, by the way. They speak in proper English, but of what Indians sound like. the very Simpsons Apu kind of a way. Oh, hi, what are you wearing? Kind of a way of speaking English. Yeah, that is there in this game. But in another game, which also I have played a great deal, is Far Cry 4, which takes place in which seems to be some kind of a hybrid between India and Nepal, and there is a lot of discourse. Shovik sir also has written extensively about it. So there they actually use Hindi, and there was quite some discussion that why they are not using Nepali and they're using Hindi. They said that it might be because of reach, but Hitman doesn't use that. They use total English. Even slum dwellers speak in the same accent as everyone. They kind of yeah. They speak in perfect British accent. Yes, so that's in place. I hope that answers your question, Zinnia.
Any other question? Let's just wait. Any other question or observation?
Yeah, I had posted the question in the previous meeting. So I was
Oh,
just
Yeah,
asking
right.
Shamu about, so he had used these logos, right? So I was just curious about what
Yeah.
is it about
Just a
and
minute.
what's the,
I'll just bring up that slide, and
oh, great. All right.
I'll maybe I have missed out on it. Just give me a moment. Okay, so this is the slide, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so here I use the Assassin's Creed logo because to refer to the Notre Dame incident I was talking about. And in this case, I have used Far Cry 4's logo to talk about origins of games which do not decide their potential. I use Far Cry 4's logo, and this is an elephant, obviously, to denote India. And this is what I think of kind of as a signifier. And also, Shovik sir also writes about it in his book Video Games and Postcolonialism, that how they kind of hark on these images, these symbols to talk about and elaborate on this. But Poonamji, what you were asking about, this one is the aspect of spatiality. I'm sorry, I forgot to speak on this, but this does not anything in particular. This is just a random sign to refer to spatiality, because otherwise the space would be empty. So I used this one. So this does not refer in particular. It's just it talks about spatiality and how spatiality operates. So yeah.
Yeah, because it looks like, how do I put it? Like astronomy, the way it is depicted.
they have essentially divided their games into two parts, where the first one hints at the tropes of those espionage films, of Bond films, of those spy films, which it is trying to actually subvert. And the thing is, when you play the games, there is actually slapstick comedy, and which obviously there are Tom and Jerry-esque things you can do. You can literally set up a spade of some sort, and people will literally knock them off. Only thing is, the knocking themselves off, they will either die horrifically. So there's this kind of dark humor that goes around in the level. For example, this essentialization. I think this essentialization isn't a part, is actually a deliberate point, and it's rather a subversion of the essentialization that happens in these world touring spy thrillers. Since the game is actually based on, as you said, that a hitman himself doesn't have an I, the identity self, so he can be anyone else. Since he himself doesn't have the I, he can be anyone else, the other, and he fluidly goes into any ethnicity and any racial identities without anyone actually bragging any I, and even nobody notices him on his facial features or something like that, notices him on his dresses. So they are basically playing around with this concept. And the point also that you made, that of the Chaye Dukan and those signposting and stuff, I think these are also these are, I think, I would say two parts. First of all, because it helps in navigating, first of all, because if we are giving too much low-risk sort of specific information, then it would clutter the map space, since we don't really use the map and far more use the world itself to navigate around. And I would say that it also works as it actually had a heightened version in Hitman 2, the second level, Miami. It literally had the
Yes.
signposted VIPs and stuff like that. So,
Right.
and that's I think that is it's actually working in satire when it's working in the game space, and that's what was my argument.
Yeah, so thank you for the comment. That is actually a very interesting remark. But I believe that Hitman is a very curious kind of a production, because for me, the satire and the serious elements coexist. You talked about Hitman Absolution, right? I enjoyed Hitman Absolution because at a long time back I played Hitman Absolution. That is the first game I brought off Steam, and Danny Trejo comes up as a very drugged, powerful monster at the end, and you have to beat him, and it's absolutely hilarious. Very Breaking Bad-ish kind of a way to commemorate Danny Trejo. So another thing I did not know is that Hitman Absolution is the worst game of the franchise. It tanked horribly,
Exactly.
and
Exactly.
that is why Hitman Absolution came out in 2008 or 2010, right? Whatever,
2010-ish.
in that decade, but not after the decade, before the decade, right? So it tanked so horribly that Hitman had to actually restart the franchise with Hitman 1, which came before this, and Hitman 2, and Hitman 3 has just released. And many people are saying that Hitman 3 is actually like a spy thriller. It is almost like a ripoff of the famous film Knives Out. Christopher Plummer just died yesterday. So because Hitman Absolution tanked so horribly, and because Hitman Absolution is also overtly, it's fun. You don't seem like it's serious at all. Okay, that is why I think that these new breed of Hitman games, this is not as in satirical vein as Absolution, as something else. Point number one. Point number two is, I agree about your point on satire, but if I compare Hitman with another satirical representation, yet very realistic depiction, I know it sounds contradictory, is Grand Theft Auto, GTA 4, or not 4, I would say GTA 5. Because GTA 4 is a very serious game. It absolutely deviates from the tone of the other GTAs, so as to speak. GTA 5 almost seems like an apology to GTA 4. Many YouTubers are of this idea that GTA 5 seems like an apology to GTA 4, as in it rips off all the seriousness and it just tells you go and steal something. So in GTA 5, here we see that it is blatantly parodying the Hollywood culture from start to finish. Be it from Michael, Franklin, Trevor, anyone. From their dialogues, the way the NPCs shout, or the way they dress, or whatever. Now, I agree that Agent 47 dresses up as a penguin or a bloated up chicken or whatever he does. That is funny. I absolutely understand. And that is hilarious. And that is absolutely in point of what you say about Hitman being satire. But why am I saying that the satire and self-seriousness?
My point was actually that Hitman isn't satirizing on the place it is recreating, rather it is actually subverting and it's a satire on the trope of spy thrillers, of essentializing these places, just as you mentioned Extraction in your paper.
Yeah, that is absolutely true. But for example, I am playing Mumbai, or I am playing another space like, for example, Japan or Miami. Now, when I read the comment sections of the playthroughs of those missions, or Japan or Miami, I do not see their natives saying that, this is funny. It doesn't happen like that. Because I can't comment on Japan or Miami because I have never been there, nor am I a native. But when I look into the playthroughs of a mission that depicts my country, I see people laughing in the comment section. Arey, ye kya bana diya bhai? Ye to bahut hi funny ho gaya. So this mentality is very interesting to me. And yeah, thank you so much for your question, your comment. Thank you.
We have a question from Shobhik Kaur. I have a question. Sure, I would like to hear your thoughts on possible reasons why Mumbai was the city that was chosen for the game. What do you think?
This is a very interesting question, Chovik. Thank you. Mumbai has a very curious relationship with the very AAA depictions. For example, Mission Impossible also had a sequence in Mumbai. Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol, the last bit, very important bit was in Mumbai. Um, why Mumbai? Because I believe it has some connection to do with Bollywood film industry, and there is also that glitz and glamour, while the whole undercuts it with the seedy underbelly, the mafia, and everything. Because in other places you might find the gangs, the mafias, but you might not find a very internationally recognized booming film culture or cinema culture. So in that sense, it is perhaps similar to Hollywood. I don't know, I'm just throwing bullets in the air. Maybe that's why Mumbai, and also there are so many slums. Does that answer your question?
That's a lovely response, Shambhu. Thank you for that. Can you hear me?
Welcome. Yeah, definitely I can hear you, my friend. Yeah.
Right. The reason why I asked about Mumbai was also because of the fact that, people like Salman Rushdie and many other authors as well as critics have spoken about the fact that Mumbai can be thought of as a microcosm for India because of its cosmopolitan nature, so-called cosmopolitan nature. At the same time, it also is at the forefront of very divisive politics and has great anxieties about what should be considered Indian identity as such, right? So one can also see Mumbai as that sort of a city which amplifies Indian pride as well as anxieties about itself. It is probably the
Yeah.
most late capitalist city in India, right?
Yeah,
So it
exactly.
is on
Yeah.
the radar of European business, right? And it is
Exactly.
on the late capitalist radar itself. So what 47 does over there, or
Yeah.
whatever events happen in Mission Impossible over there, has a
Exactly.
resonance in for the
Exactly.
international capital itself. And at the same time, I am also reminded of the fact that it was probably Vikram Chandra who talked about the fact that Mumbai was the maximum city. And it's a very interesting term he used. And while I was watching your presentation, I kept thinking about the way in which this particular phrase sort of returned to me again and again, that Agent
Yeah.
47
Yeah.
in the maximum city, so to say.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
many different
Yeah.
identities and many different politics coalesce around 47 as he moves through the space of Mumbai. Right, and that is something which I also wanted to ask you, and also wanted to know your thoughts about that. What kind of a cosmopolitanism or what kind of nativisms does 47
Yes.
see or sort of negotiate with in Mumbai? Right, and that's the
Huh.
reason why I asked this.
Yeah, so actually, the thing that you say about Mumbai being maximum city, or what Rushdie says about it, or whatever, I have seen this tendency because Mumbai is so popular and there is so much multimedia activity happening through Mumbai. You can say that that is the hub of it. Whatever. I have seen many filmmakers. Uh, the one that I can remember right at the top of my head is Anurag Kashyap. When he made Sacred Games season 1 or season 2, he was giving interviews, and the phrase that I kept hearing again and again is that this is a love letter to Mumbai. This is a love letter to Mumbai. And many filmmakers who have come out of Mumbai, because it gets the most traction all over the world because of its popularity and Bollywood or whatever. This term, love letter to Mumbai, I have heard it many times. And I think that that depiction of Mumbai becomes crucial to the story that they're telling. Many things that we have heard in the case of Kolkata as well, that the heroine is Kolkata, not someone else. So I think that when you talk about what kind of nativisms, could you just repeat that question once again? I'm sorry, it just escaped me.
Yes, I was talking about the fact that Mumbai can be thought of as a hub of multiculturalism, as a sort of a microcosm for India, right? The idea that
Yeah,
the
yeah,
the most common idea that is usually talked about in case of India,
yeah,
the
yeah,
the overused phrase. I think that
Yes.
particular phrase is called unity in diversity, right?
Yeah.
So Mumbai can be thought of as a hub of many cosmopolitanisms
Yes.
as well as many nativisms, right? There are many nativistic
Absolutely.
identities which are fighting with each other in Mumbai. At the same time, there are also many
Absolutely.
cosmopolitan identities which are fighting in Mumbai. So when
Yes.
47 is sort of moving through these particular spaces and these particular, identity politics, then I
Yes.
kept thinking about the ways in which he moves between, say, for
Yes.
example, between Shah and Daud, right? So these are the things which I kept
Yes.
thinking about when you were
Yes.
talking about this yellow washing that continues to happen
Hmm.
in Mumbai.
Yeah, so thank you so much again for repeating it. The thing is that the nativism that you talked about is something that also interests me very much, because for me, the nativism, it's a shame that Neil is not here. I really hope that he could have joined us, because he is from Mumbai and he could have given us a much more authentic idea about it. But, um, uh, going back to Sacred Games again. Now, be it Sacred Games or some other TV series that is coming from that area, you see that language, be it Munna Bhai MBBS, be it Sacred Games, that kind of a Tapori language almost became a norm in people speaking. The language became more popular, the way of speaking, the dialect became more popular than what was being spoken. For example, the word bhau has become so popular that I use bhau more than I use bhai, because I love that word. So I think that is how, you get to see the nativisms being, you were talking about the cosmopolitan city, right? That it represents in an Indianness. I think that is because Mumbai is a commodity, in a very Marxist sense of the term, because it has its industry and its connections with the West. Therefore, I think it is the West which sees Mumbai as India, and not as India which sees Mumbai as India. I think it is about perspective, and I think Xenia also commented on it. I might have forgotten about it. So I think that is why when Agent 47 traverses from Shah to Dawood, he is going through that whole levels of the native, because Shah clearly conforms to that native idea of a mystique life or whatever, which is hilarious. And then there is Dawood, who is international, who has foreign collaborators, who is making movies. So this is how he negotiates the different levels of individualism and cosmopolitanism. I hope it addresses your question.
Thank you. We have very little time left now.
Yeah, we have 4 minutes left.
So, and also we don't have any more observations or questions. So,
I just have one last comment, rather comment,
okay, yeah.
question,
Mhm.
whatever. I was just thinking that we're talking about stereotypes, we're talking about these issues, but sometimes, I mean, understand we to a certain extent we can understand because these people are not Indian, the developers are not India based or whatever. But sometimes these errors, these problems, these these using of stereotypes is also done by Indian gamers, Indian game
Oh,
developers,
yes.
so I don't know if it's exactly a colonial kind of a white people problem, or is this just how India is perceived in our own eyes, in other people's eyes, kind of a problem.
I think that this has to do with the whole context business. Thank you, Poonamdi, for the question. I was listening to Zizek once, uh, and so on and so on. But Zizek made a very
Oh,
he
by the way,
always
for
makes.
context, I'm talking about, I have, by just a disclaimer, I have not played Raji, but I have seen the playthroughs and I'm talking about the color
Yes.
scheme,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
festive color scheme, the kind of, the
Which is
vibe
also very
basically,
the
which is
vibe. Yeah,
interesting.
yeah,
So I'm
yeah,
just
yeah.
thinking about that. Yeah, please go on.
Yeah, right. So I was not talking, wow, that was a slip. I was listening to Zizek once. So Zizek was commenting on how he had befriended a few black people in America who had come to his book signing, and he cracked a joke and his friends laughed, and then they whispered in his ears that he had the privilege of saying the N word to them. And then Zizek said that, I call my Chinese friends by the Y name, or I call my black friends by the N name. So I don't see how that is racist or problematic. He was talking about humor and language and all that stuff.
Right. So maybe it could be about the context and the intention.
Maybe it could be about the context, intention, and who is saying it.
Okay.
I think that is the differentiator.
I agree. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I think we're running out of time. Or it's true.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yes,
wrap
we
it
are
up.
really did. Okay. Let's just thank you everyone for coming to this talk, and thank you, Samya, for giving us this fantastic talk. It was truly a fantastic and awesome presentation.
Thank you everyone else for being here. Thank you so
talk.
much.
Thank you all.